What is your name?
Haskell Davis.
Where were you born?
I was born in McDowell County, Old Fort, at home. Dr. McIntosh Sr. delivered me. I weighed 3.5 pounds, which was premature. And the doctor told my mother that he thought I was going to be all right, but to keep warm water bottles near me and to feed me carnation milk and Karo syrup. And he came back in a month or two and he said, I can't believe this is the same baby. So I was born at home on a Sunday morning.
Do you have any stories about your ancestors?
I do have some stories about my ancestors. I've done some research on my family genealogy, and this is a book about our Davis and Connor heritage. And while I was doing research on the book, I was really shocked to find out that one of my ancestors was on a ship coming to America, one of the ships that came to Jamestown, Virginia, which started America. And there is a book written about the shipwreck that he was on. It was the Sea Venture, and they got in a hurricane and were swept off course. The other ships went on to Jamestown to start the settlement, and they survived and wrecked on the island of Bermuda. And they lived there about a year and rebuilt the ship, had plenty to eat because the Spanish had wrecked there before and had left pigs, and they were just plenty of wild pigs on the island and a lot of fruit, and so they did very well for that year. And then they loaded up all this food and sailed up the coast of America to Jamestown to find that the other settlers and the other people that had come on the other ships had starved and were dying and were fixing to leave. And so they met them leaving and went back, and they had plenty of food. And so that there's a book written about it that says the shipwreck that saved America. And I was surprised to find that one of my ancestors, 35 years old, was on there. He was single, and he was on the ship. That was an amazing story to me about my ancestors.
What are some of your early childhood memories?
Well, I go back, as you can tell, a long way. I was in the 4th grade when we got electricity. I remember them wiring our house, and I could not wait until we could have a refrigerator and have ice. I thought that was the most wonderful thing, to have ice, and we did not have it at that time. We did not have a bathroom. We had an outhouse, and so my dad started, even before the electricity was turned on, getting the bathroom built, and we would not have to go outside to an outhouse. To me, those kind of things are memories of my childhood. Another one was that there was only one phone in our whole community. The phone company was owned by Sheriff Ashby Robinson's son, and the wires were strung on just regular old locust poles. And the only phone in our community was belonged to my uncle, and the number was like 24. And if you got a call, my aunt would come out and holler a half a mile to our house and tell us that we had a phone call. It was a party line, and if you got on the phone, everybody that had one, which wasn't many, but they could all listen in to what you had to say. It was not private. And that, to me, that's some of the early memories of my childhood, the electricity and the fact that we didn't have we listened to a battery radio. We liked to listen to the Grand Ole Opera and all of those. And I think one of the, places that we enjoyed more than anywhere else was sitting around the fireplace. And my dad would tell stories and how he grew up and share those things with us. And it was a very close-knit family. The fireplace was used. Mother would put milk in a churn, set it near the fireplace so she could make butter and have to churn. I remember having to churn, and I didn't enjoy that chore.
Well, you mentioned school. What was school like for you?
Well, I enjoyed school. I guess my favorite subject would have been writing and English, and the subject that I had trouble with, I guess, was math. I never admitted that to my children because I didn't want them to say, well, you weren't good at it either. But I guess that would have been my subject that I was not as didn't do as well in. I enjoyed school. Had a lot of friends. One memory I have when I guess I was a junior in high school, and we respected the principal. He came in one day. We were all watching a movie. On Fridays, we brought a dime and got to watch movies. And so he came down and he pointed, and we didn't know who he wanted, so everybody pointed at themselves until he got out to me, and I did like this, and he went, and I was scared to death. I thought, he's going to paddle me. I'm in trouble. So he called me out, and I had won first place in Western North Carolina art contest, and they gave me $50. $50 then to me would have been like $300 or $400 now. I mean, that was just the most amazing thing. But I enjoyed school. I was chosen the friendliest in my class. There were about 40, I guess, in our graduating class. We took a trip to Washington, D.C. That was enjoyable. And so school, I really liked all my teachers. I did not have a teacher that I did not like.
Please tell me about your work as a teacher.
I decided, first of all, that I wanted to be an artist, so I went off to art school. And I found out that was not really what I wanted to do. And I called my dad and said, I want to come home. And he said, well, I didn't make you go. You come home if you want to. So I came back home, and I went to Montreat to college. And I decided then, I had some very good teachers there, that I would like to go into teaching. So I was working at the Historical Foundation, a place there in Montreat, to help pay for my tuition. And I had to stop going to school for about one semester. And when I did, Uncle Sam called me and said, we want you in the Army. I had my training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And from there, I had requested to be sent to Germany because I wanted to go see the world. And when I went down to see where I was being sent, I was shocked when they said that I was being sent to Fairbanks, Alaska. And all I could picture was an iceberg. But I served 2 years in Fairbanks. I loved it. I was up there during the big earthquake. I have a friend that we just got together not long ago that I was in the Army with. He came out here. He wanted to go to the Billy Graham place in Charlotte. And we had a lot of laughs. The night that the earthquake hit, we were sitting at the dining room table, and I said, I'm getting dizzy. And he said, no, we're having an earthquake. And so we both ran to the door. They told us never to run outside. The ground could swallow us. And so he said, Lord, for all the bad things I've done, please forgive me, because we thought it was going to be over. At that time, I forgot how many deaths there were, but the Penny's store in Anchorage was like 10 stories high. And after the earthquake, it was totally level. And half of the city of Anchorage went down a whole level. The street they had to make it to where it was So it was terrible. And my mother and dad could not get in touch with me because they had no idea whether they heard about the earthquake, but they didn't know, about me until I guess it was weeks later.
Have you ever been called off to war or any major fights while you were in the military?
No, I thought I would be sent to Vietnam. That was going on during the time I was serving. And I had a friend that worked, two friends that was there with me on base that ended up dying in Vietnam. But I was not sent to Vietnam. I thought I would be. They sent a lot of people from there. So I had to stop going to school and went into the Army, and I got some courses while I was at the University of Alaska. There, I decided then that I wanted to for sure that I wanted to be a teacher. So I came back, and a friend of mine who had been attending Montreat was going to Berry College in Georgia. So I decided that he asked me if I would take him back to school, and I told him I would. And so I fell in love with Berry College. It's a beautiful campus. It's in northern Georgia. And I graduated from there and was interviewed by some people there that came to the college on the day that we graduated. And they interviewed everybody for prospective teachers. And so I was hired on the spot and took a job teaching at Calhoun High School. And I loved it. I think it was, and they really did respect teachers then. When we went to the football games, they honored us, and we were, treated special. And we kept saying that we were eventually going to come back to North Carolina, so because that was home. And so I got married, came to my graduation at Berry College, and we lived in an apartment down there while I taught for a year. And so then my wife and I moved back to North Carolina. I remodeled an old house, and while I was there, and this does not happen very often, I heard a knock on the door, and I went to the door, and a principal here in the county said, "I heard that you were a good teacher and I'd like to hire you." I mean, you have to go beg for jobs now. But he came and he offered me a job teaching the 8th grade at Glenwood. And so I took the job, and I think it was, some of the best teaching days that I've ever had. I had a sign under my clock that said, "Time will pass, will you?" I remember things like that. We had an old radiator that would not work, and so we had a bucket, and we had to run the water in it to get it hot, and then carry the cold water out and dump it out the back door. But those were wonderful days of teaching. Then when we consolidated the schools and built the new schools, I had already started working on my master's degree in guidance and counseling. And so the superintendent came and told me, "If you will promise me that you'll finish that degree, we'll hire you as a guidance counselor at West Junior High School." So I finished my degree and worked at West McDowell Junior High School as a guidance counselor and as assistant principal for a number of years, around 18 years. And then I decided that I wanted to get my degree from Western again in administration. So I got a master's degree in administration, and I was hired as assistant principal and then as principal at Glenwood Elementary, and I retired from Glenwood. And I had wonderful students. I still see them every day. It makes you feel old with their children. But those were wonderful teaching days.
How did you begin writing?
I started writing. Actually, I did not do writing until after I retired. I think the thing that caused me to want to write is when we would have, students would be given assignments to write, and I would go in and observe a teacher. And I remember telling the students, now, you write, and I'm going to write. And when we get through, we'll all read what we have written. And I said, now, don't forget to use good adjectives and those kind of things. And so I would sit down and write a page or two and then turn around. And after we had finished, I would read mine with theirs. And so I thought, I enjoy writing. And so when I was in college, I had promised a roommate of mine that I was going to write about a story that I ended up writing. And the name of it is The Unmarked Grave. This was a story. We were in college at Montreat, and there were about 4 or 5 or 6 of us fellows in the dorm room. And James Bird, my roommate, and guess what I called him? Jay Bird. Jay Bird started telling the story, and I said, you're making this up. This didn't happen. He said, it really did happen, and I'll take you over there where it happened. So we loaded up in my dad's old station wagon, and we drove over to Kona, where this story takes place. So this is historical fiction. That means it really happened, but what we don't know, I made up and told myself. So it's an interesting story. It's about the only woman ever hanged in North Carolina. She was a young girl, and she killed her husband, and she chopped him up and burned him in the fireplace. That back then, she had no way of claiming self-defense or anything. So it's an interesting story that I ended up writing. I had written 3 chapters while I was in college at Montreat, and then after I retired, I found those chapters in the basement in a box, and I got them out about 1.5 years ago and started writing again. And those 3 chapters are over in the middle of the book and not the beginning. Also, I changed my mind about a lot of the things that happened, and the story is one that tells itself because it has so many twists and turns, but it's still interesting to a lot of people today.
Please tell me about your hobbies.
Well, my hobbies, I guess, one of them is music. I love music. I was a choir director at a Baptist church here in McDowell County for about 23 years. I also have children that are musical. They love I have a granddaughter that plays the violin, son that plays the guitar and all other instruments. And so I think I'm from a musical family. My wife plays the piano, but I love music, and I love to listen to music, good music. And as you've already mentioned, I think one of my things now is writing. I did a book called Tales of a Lifetime, and this I did for my grandchildren. It tells some of the things that happened while I was growing up and a lot of the stories that took place, and I did it for my grandchildren. And then I did a book on my wife's family, and she's related to Daniel Boone. And I have an interesting story about this. My grandson told his teacher that he was related to Daniel Boone. And she said, oh, isn't everybody? And he said, no, but I am. And so she said, yeah, and let it go at that. Well, the next day he brought his book and showed it to the teacher, and she said, oh, I'm sorry, you really are. So I've enjoyed writing those books, the genealogy, and it has a lot of importance, I think, to my family. Art, I enjoy painting. I have had one print done, and I think that was the highlight of my painting. As I mentioned earlier, when I first started to school, I wanted to be an artist. So I decided that was not the way I was going to make my living, that I would just end up doing it as a hobby and what I wanted to do. So I painted, and I brought one of the paintings to my school one day, and a bunch of the teachers gathered around and said, "Why don't you have a print made of that?" And this fella said, "I know where you can call and they'll tell you how to get a print made." So he did. And I drove to Ohio, and that's the first time that I felt like that I was really an artist. They had a marquee out in front of the factory that said, "Welcome, North Carolina artist, Haskell Davis." And that's when I really thought, well, I am an artist. But anyway, I've done a lot of paintings. I do some portraits. I like paintings of mountains, and I even like to do paintings like the scenery with waterfalls and things like that. But painting is one of my hobbies. I like to put on classical music and build a fire in the fireplace and get my brushes out.
The cover that you did for your grandchildren, can you tell me what that cover is about?
This cover is a painting that I did, and I am sitting on the rock with the possum in the sack, and this is my brother, and this is his friend, and we were actually coon hunting, but we caught a possum, and they made me carry it in the sack. And there is a story in here about my father and my uncles going hunting, and it sort of relates back to that. They treed the coon, and my uncle went up the tree. It went in a hole in the tree, so he climbed the tree, had a stick, and he twisted the coon out, and he hollered to my other uncle on the ground, "Shoot this thing, it's going to eat me up." And he shot, and they both landed at the bottom of the tree, and the dogs and the coon and all were just in a tussle. And finally, when they got them all separated, found out that my Uncle Hardy was just barely had one shot in his foot, but you thought he'd been killed. So there's stories in there for my grandchildren about those kind of things that happened.
Can you tell us a little about the objects you brought today?
Well, one of the questions that I had seen that you were going to ask was what were my favorite toys. We didn't have a lot of toys. I remember one year that I got a little rubber ball, and it was about this size, and I was so thrilled with it. And I was bouncing it, playing with it, and it bounced into the fireplace, and it burned a place on it, but Mother got it out of the fireplace before it burned it up. And I always had to play with it with a big knot on it where it was burned. But most of the time, what we got for Christmas was candy or fruit or something. But I remember a very special time when my mother bought me this truck, and it was high technology at the time, and it's made out of metal. That's why it's still here today. Toys today aren't made like that. But the reason I say it was high tech, in the bottom you placed a flashlight battery, and the headlights worked. And I loved that truck. It was, and you see, I still have it. It sits on a shelf with my other thing. And I was given a ball glove, and I still have, and it's pretty dilapidated, but that was my ball glove. And then later, I was given this clock. My mother ordered this clock for me, and it's Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers and Gene Autry was our heroes, I guess you'd say. And Roy Rogers came to Old Fort one time with his horse Trigger. And I was so upset because Daddy couldn't take us, and I didn't get to see him. So I think this is why Mother ended up ordering me the clock. I don't know whether it'll run, but if you'll notice, Roy Rogers is riding his horse. I saw this on the Antique Roadshow, and they had one, and the lady said it would be around $1,200. And I said, well, I'm going to keep mine.
Please tell me about your parents' wedding.
My grandfather walked from Asheboro, North Carolina, to Mount Hebron, which is near Old Fort, and in order to put his children in a Christian school. And while there, Mother grew up and saw this fella playing baseball out in the field on Sunday, and she took a liking to him, and he saw her, and they took a liking to each other. But her mother and dad did not want her to get married because she was supposed to marry a preacher or somebody. And so her sister helped her by telling that they were going down the river to hunt the ducks and get them and put them up. And Dad was waiting with a friend of his who had a car, and they left and drove to South Carolina. And the first place they stopped to get married, her dad had already called and said, "Do not marry them." And so they kept on until they found a place that he had not called, and they got married. She was 16, and her mother and dad the next day loaded up everything and moved to Arkansas and left her here with my dad. And they would not write her. They didn't have anything to do with her for a long time until Dad finally took Mother out there to see him. So, and I got to see my grandmother and grandfather Williams, my mother's mother and dad, twice during my lifetime, until when my grandfather died, they brought grandmother out here to live with us.
Well, did they ever forgive you?
They did forgive. However, they were very religious, and my dad liked tobacco, and to them that was horrible. And so that was one of the things that they did not agree with, and so they had a hard time ever accepting my dad. But they did. They eventually did, and my grandfather thought the world of my dad before it was over.
Tell me about your wedding.
I remember that we were married at West Court Baptist Church, and I remember thinking, you really are doing something that's going to last for a lifetime. And I remember them saying, you may have bad luck because it rained. It poured the rain. I remember my wife-to-be having to get out of the car and them holding umbrellas over her to try to get in. And her family was there. Her mother was living then, and it was a beautiful day. She had a nice church wedding.
When you think about the grandchildren that you've written books for, and then their children's children and their children's children, beyond that, they're going to have a nice history there in the books. What would you like them to know about you or remember about you?
I would like for them to remember that family is very important, that we, the things that we share, that even though times are changing, that bond, that family ties are still just as important as they ever were, and that I love them more than anything. Most important things is, and that's one thing about my wife. She is not a selfish person. She thinks of others first, and I want them to know that is an important thing, is not to just think what's for me, what's in it for me, but that I can serve others and I can do things. And I hope that that's what people remember me as, being a good teacher, a good father, a good grandfather. And I think those things are the important things, not how much money we make and the things that we leave behind.
Thank you for answering all these questions.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.